My name is Graciela Saenz. I'm an attorney here in Houston, born and raised here in Houston. And we're standing in front of Mexican American history mural prepared by the Heritage Society, I should say, funded by the Heritage Society at Sam Houston Park. I've been tasked to give you a little explanation of what is actually on this mural. Having been born and raised here in Houston, a lot of the images that I see here impacted my family and me. So starting off with, the Mexican American community holds very dearly their families. And a very important part of family is grandparents, los abuelos. So in this part of the imagery, you will see grandpa, grandma, and the children. We, in many respects, have multi-generational families. So it's mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, cousins, and children in our households. Here you will see a replica of the LULAC clubhouse. This clubhouse was actually bought in 1955 by the League of United Latin American Citizens, Council 60. And it was bought in the 50s, unfortunately, because they kept getting harassed by the police when they met. And so they decided it would be best for them to hold a house on their own that they could meet and enjoy family and festivities and help with the many issues that the community was facing, including discrimination, civil rights violations, police abuse, lack of education, lack of opportunity. The list goes on. The history of the LULAC house is amazing, and the people that made the decisions and what went on was also very important to what took place here in Houston. You also have several houses that were important to the community that are painted throughout this mural. You have the railroad line that in many respects was very important to the economy of Houston. And in the early 1900s, there were many Mexican laborers that were actually picked up throughout Mexico, through the villages, and brought into Houston. And that's how my family ended up here. My grandfather actually came as a laborer, and him and his brother, my older uncle Cipriano, ended up working for the railroads for many years. Unfortunately, in the 1930s, during the Depression, there was a huge removal of Mexican citizens from throughout the southwestern part of the United States. And because of that removal, my father, who was only 6 years old, was also removed. He was born here. He was actually baptized at Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is depicted over there. And lucky for him, because that was the basis upon which he was able to get a delayed birth certificate to show that he was a U.S. citizen. We have important community members that actually were important to us because they became university professors, they graduated, and they became important to fighting our civil rights cases. The Mexican League, unfortunately, again, Houston was segregated. We had segregated schools, segregated even our sports teams. So we had a Mexican league that actually played, and they were very, very, I would say, important to the entertainment of all our community neighborhoods. The barrios used to all get together and go to the baseball games by the Mexican League. Again, the port, another important part of Houston, and our community in many respects provided labor. But unfortunately, the longshoremen kept many Mexicans from being able to get some of the good jobs until much later, when they actually fought and got an opportunity to become longshoremen and part of the economy through the port. We have here Ninfa Lorenzo. Mama Nifa, as was everybody so fondly remembered her. She was a businesswoman. She had a family. She was a widow, and the only thing she knew how to do, well, I shouldn't say the only thing, but one of the things that she did in order to provide for her family was start a small Mexican restaurant. That restaurant became a very popular place for many Houstonians to go and eat. She was the best of hostess when it came to making sure everyone was treated fairly and delighted in her cuisine. She became an ambassador to the city of Houston before her death. Again, this particular image is, again, the mother. The importance of the mother figure in our community is very, I think, well represented here. You have the children around her, almost like the Madonna in a way, but it's because the woman was important in many respects. It's interesting to note that this young Latina has books. This is what my mother told me. She says, "Mijita, tu educación." So to her, even though she came from a rural community, she was not well educated, but she knew the importance of an education to her children in order to succeed here in the United States and in Houston. Again, because of the segregated communities, many businesses took place so that they could cater to the community. So you had the entertainment of El Teatro Azteca, very popular theater, cinema. They brought movies from Mexico and Latin America to the community, so they were very popular in the 50s, 60s, and even through the 70s until they finally closed. We have the American Nightclub, which many people said was the largest dance hall this side of the Mississippi. And the reason is because it actually had 3 very large dance halls, and it was very popular for community. This was one of the few places that the community could come and host their events, such as their weddings, their quinceañeras, their birthdays, their baptisms, anything we had to celebrate, it was at the American Nightclub. And I remember it fondly because my family, I came from a family of 9, plus mom and dad is 11. The way we made ends meet was by the maintenance at this nightclub. We would clean it up after the dances. Not a happy memory there, but the interesting thing is I got to know a lot about my community. Whenever anybody became rowdy at that location, they actually had a jail cell. They would put everybody in the jail cell there until the end of the dance, and then they would haul them all to jail at the end of the dance. This particular KLBL was actually started by the Morales family. The Morales family were a business family that had the first funeral home, but it also started the first Spanish-speaking radio station. KLBL was important to our community because in many respects, not only for entertainment, information. This was the radio station that could provide them information about jobs, and it also provided them emergency information. So in case of a hurricane, in case of bad weather, it was the radio station for our community. Again, it was Spanish speaking. It allowed those individuals that would normally not have access to some of the other radio stations to be able to do programming here. Very important during the 50s, 60s, and I think up to the 70s. We have the Our Lady of Guadalupe Church here. It's this particular church is over 100 years old. It's in the 2nd Ward of Houston, and it was actually constructed because, again, Houston was segregated. This church was built for the Mexican community, and this is where my father was baptized back in 1926. He is 95 years old now, and it was a good thing because they had his birth certificate that showed that he was born here in Houston, and he was able to get his proof of citizenship and was able to come back from Mexico at the age of 18. This is Mr. Centeno. He was a very popular musician. He was born without an arm, but he blew his horn with just one arm. He was amazing. He played with some of the biggest orchestras around, and he was lovely. His daughter, who was Norma Centeno, Norma again was a very popular songstress. She entertained so many of us, absolutely one of the most beautiful souls. She was taken from us much too early. Norma and her father and her brothers had the Centeno group. And again, provided some incredible songs and merengues and salsas and everything. We are very festive when it comes to music. And our community works hard, but loves to play hard as well. So entertainment, very important. Here you see the different, again, because our community was so segregated, many times our Spanish-speaking community would not be able to get information, but during the early 1900s, we had more Spanish language newspapers than anywhere around. And then they became very important in the 70s to get information back out as to what was actually happening in our communities. So the Chicano movement, immigration issues, all sorts of issues that were going on and were taking place. That's the way we got our information. Abarrotes, and here we go, the tamales, aguas frescas. This is a store that you can buy, and everybody in our barrios had a little store that a tiendita, that we would go and buy what we needed. And in our little barrios, we always had our little taqueria, we had our panaderia, and I'm not sure that building, but we also had our cantinas. I don't see anything about cantinas here, but that was also part of it. Again, this house, I think it's the Rust House, that was also used and popular in our off navigation. That became, I believe, for our teenagers, and again, a social service agency in many respects. We went on our war heroes that were very important because we were definitely part of this community. We had community members who were also important. The Felix or the Fraga family. This is Felix Fraga. Felix was an educator and then became a social worker and worked with the Ripley House for many years before he went on to city council. He was also one of the first baseball players as far as the Hispanic League over there was concerned. We had more decorated soldiers, I think, than any other community in the U.S. Roy Benavides and several other soldiers that came back decorated because of their service. Our Fiestas Patrias festivities were started to give history of our community, our culture, and the Fiestas Patrias, many were started through LULAC and other organizations like the GI Forum as well. Many veterans organizations that helped to put these events together. It was parades, it was dances, it was breakfasts, it was lunches. It was to recognize the importance of maintaining our culture within this community as we were growing. We have, this is our state representative, Cristina Morales. Cristina was crowned Miss Fiestas Patrias at one time, and so that's how come she is depicted with a crown. Now she is a state representative. We also have Irma Galvan. Irma is also like a Ninfa Lorenzo restaurant owner. She too was a widow. She had no other way to support her family other than her cuisine, her cooking. She just not too long ago was the recipient of the James Beard Award. Her restaurant has grown tremendously, and whenever anybody goes and eats at Irma's, they say it's like eating at home. Home cooked meals almost. They're very, very good, and Irma has been part of this community, also an ambassador in many ways, to help people understand where we are, an opportunity. Lionel Castillo was our Hispanic leader in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He became a city controller, and then went on to become a U.S. Immigration Naturalization Director at the national level. He has also part of the organizing of the Huelga schools at one time when because of the injustices in the ISDs, there was a walkout by our community to refuse, and because of that walkout, they created Huelga schools where the students could go and still continue their education until the issues with the ISDs were ironed out. And one of the individuals that helped in that regard was Yolanda Black Navarro. Miss Navarro was a corporate leader in many ways, but also a community leader. She was greatly loved by so many of us. She not only was an individual with great intellect, but also had the fun side of her. Everyone always remembered her with a huge smile, and she was always someone that could inspire people to do the right thing. That was also very, we miss her. We have here, unfortunately, the U.S., this is the depiction of Joe Campos Torres. And Mr. Torres came back from the Vietnam era after serving 2 years, and unfortunately, about 3 days after he got here on Cinco de Mayo 1977, he was murdered by 5 police officers who had assaulted him, beat him up, taken him to jail. They wouldn't accept him. They told him to take him to the hospital instead. Instead, they took him back to what was called the hole, and they threw him in the bayou. And unfortunately, because of that, the community, there was an uprising in 1978 when the jurors came back. Unfortunately, the other injustice that happened there was that the trial was held in Huntsville, of all places, which is pro law enforcement and majority of white, unfortunately, community. And they came back with a 1-year probation and a $1 fine for the officers. That is another story that unfortunately is told because this is part of our history and part of the things that we have to overcome, and we have to work together to find answers, because unfortunately, even today, 44 years later, we are still seeing situations of abuse. We have the great pride of many of our community is the jaripeo, the rodeo, very involved in a lot of rodeo activities because of the tradition of vaqueros in Texas, many ranches, many horse farms and so forth. Many of the laborers are of Mexican descent. They excel in a lot of the horse activities and ceremonies, so that's depicted there. We also have the lowriders in the back. The lowriders are the vehicles that are sometimes very common to some of our community members. These cars will jack themselves up. They actually bounce along, and they're kind of cool to see. They are well invested in. They invest thousands of dollars in these vehicles, and they have car parades and they have car clubs based on the lowriders. Here again, the vaquero was a statue that was created and by Luis Jimenez, and he did this to place at Moody Park. And the park was where the Campos Torres uprising happened in 1978. And this was a way for the city to help the community heal a bit. And this was the first piece of public art to be given to the community. Unfortunately, there was a dispute as to whether he should be holding a gun because of the violence it depicted. But needless to say, it's still there. So the creator would not change it. He had the ability to, but he said he depicted it because a vaquero uses his gun not for violence but for protection when he's out in the wild. And so he had a common sense, I think, answer to it. We have here John Kennedy, Mrs. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson and his wife, and they are at the Rice Hotel. LULAC had invited the president to come and speak to the Mexican American community. And this was the first time that it happened. It was in 1963, actually the day before he was assassinated. He had come to Houston, and it was at the Rice Hotel. It was through LULAC, League of United Latin American Citizens. He And as a matter of fact, we actually have a recording of Jackie Kennedy welcoming the community in Spanish. And so that just endeared her so much to our community. And he went on to, I think, unfortunately he died, but win the hearts of our community in many ways. We have here myself. I was voted into office at the end of 1991, took office as a city council member at large, position 1 for the city of Houston in 1992. I served for 6 years. I became the first Latina to be voted citywide in Houston, and I also became the first Latina to be appointed as the mayor pro tem by then Mayor Lanier. So, and then we have Tijerina, that's right, Mr. Tijerina. Mr. Tijerina was a restaurant owner, and he also was very important to our community, very active. There were many things that he sponsored and he supported to fight the injustices, to fight, the inequality. He was pro-education, and he was a man that was very well respected, not only with our community, but the community at large. So in many respects, he was the spokesperson for many of us. So you have it there, all of these different images that depict the Mexican-American experience here in Houston, Texas. And soon we're going to have a sequel.
Yay. Yay, thank you.
Thank you.